out of Europe this hour. A Russian missile strike on Bakalya kills 3 people and wounds 10, including 3 teenagers, according to Kharkiv regional officials. The overnight blast damages residential buildings and destroys cars, with images showing blown-out windows and fire on upper floors. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy arrives in Paris to seek stronger air defense support as Russia intensifies missile and drone strikes. The visit comes during a tour of Western allies, with France promising new systems and a major defense deal expected very soon. Britain plans to reinterpret human rights rules to make it easier to deport migrants who enter illegally as part of a wider asylum shake-up. The government says Interior Minister Shabana Mahmood will set out how courts should apply the European Convention on Human Rights. Poland's Prime Minister says an explosive device blew up part of the Warsaw-Lublin rail line in what he calls an act of sabotage. Authorities say emergency teams and prosecutors are at the scene, with more damage found further down the route. Germany's finance minister arrives in Beijing as Berlin faces a record trade gap with China and growing pressure to stabilize supply chains. Lars Klingbeil meets Chinese officials to discuss trade and rare earths, marking the new coalition's first high-level visit after a previous trip was cancelled. Spanish police arrest Wilmer Pipo Chaviara, the fugitive leader of Ecuador's Los Lobos gang, after he allegedly faked his death and hid in Europe. Ecuador says he continued running criminal operations from abroad as violence soars amid gang rivalries and cocaine trafficking routes. Hungary enters a fierce election season as Prime Minister Viktor Orban faces his toughest challenge in years from opponent Peter Magyar. Support for Orban is slipping amid high inflation and economic strains, with Magyar promising to reverse his long-standing political system. Switzerland's economy minister says the country hasn't sold its soul after agreeing a new framework, cutting US tariffs in exchange for major Swiss investment. The deal lowers American imports duties from 39% to 15%, though opposition parties question the concessions and the negotiation process. Those are the headlines of this hour coming out of Europe, but we turn to our first story. And the European Union is taking a closer look at how to cover Ukraine's growing financial gap, with Commission President Ursula von der Leyen warning member states that the scale of the shortfall is significant. In a letter sent to EU capitals, she outlined 3 possible ways of going forward, stressing that any option the bloc chooses can be designed as traditional and strictly time-limited. Von der Leyen also underlined that the proposals are not mutually exclusive, meaning they could be combined or rolled out in sequence to keep support flowing to Kyiv. The discussion comes as the war enters another difficult phase and Ukraine continues to rely heavily on international partners to maintain essential state services and sustain its defence effort. Joining us now. Okay, of course, this is a huge development coming out of the European Union's President, Ursula von der Leyen. She warns that member states that the shortfall of the financing gap is significant. In a letter she sent to EU capitals, she outlined 3 ways of going forward, stressing that any option the bloc chooses can be designed as transitional and strictly time-limited. Ursula von der Leyen also underlined that the proposals are not mutually exclusive, meaning they could be combined or rolled out in sequence to keep support flowing to Kyiv. This, of course, comes as Ukraine faces huge Russian advances in the eastern region, battling in regions such as Zaporozhye, of course the wider Donetsk region, in regards to the entirety of the Donbass region. Ukraine, of course, heavily reliant on European support. Ukrainian President Zelenskyy currently in Paris, set to meet with French President Emmanuel Macron, hoping to make a deal in order to get further air defences in order to help the Ukrainian war effort. And so we will bring you all that and more coming up later. However, right now, this letter from the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen clearly shows the stable support that Western allies, especially the European Union, have shown Kiev and President Zelenskyy. Ben Aries joins us now. He's a journalist and he joins us live from Berlin, and he's here to give us some further insight on this topic. Ben, it's always a pleasure to talk to you here on the programme. Thank you very much for joining us. First of all, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has warned that this financing gap is significant. Do we know how large this gap actually is and what risks Kiev faces if this money doesn't arrive soon amid these escalating offensives from the Russian military and, of course, an approaching winter?
It's very significant indeed. The estimates for this year vary somewhere between 8 and 19 billion, depending on the military spend. And the IMF said in September that for next year it's going to go shooting up to 65 billion. That's without that money, Ukraine is facing an economic collapse. That they've been scrambling around trying to raise more money on the debt markets, raising taxes and what have you. But mainly half Ukraine's funding comes from abroad, and that used to be 40% US, 60% EU. Trump has pulled out completely. He hasn't sent a penny since he took office. So it's all on the EU, and the EU countries, France, the government's already collapsed because of a massive budget deficit. Most of the leading countries are heavily in debt. The UK is shortly before asking the IMF for a bailout because it's having the same problems. And Germany too, the budget deficit is going shooting up. So finding this money, well, look, basically the only pool of cash available to fund this is the Russian frozen funds, $300 billion, $200 billion of which are in Europe. And that's the reparations lines that have been debated. There was a vote on that in November, which failed. There's another attempt in December. But von der Leyen said last week that she has a plan B, which is basically for EU members to make short-term, quote-unquote, bridge loans. In other words, they're going to borrow the money themselves or draw on their own budgets, taxpayers' money, but nobody's happy about that either. So the prospects of raising this money are really quite poor. And time is running out. So the economists are saying if more money is not found very soon, then somewhere between February and April, Ukraine is facing a budget crisis where it will be unable to meet salaries, it will be unable to keep the government functioning, it'll have to renege on all of the obligations it has to the international donors who lent it money as opposed to giving it money. And it'll become extremely severe. So this is what Zelensky's doing this week. He's touring Europe, and basically he's asking for more air defense because of the missile barrage that's going on, destroying Ukraine's power sector, and he's asking for more money.
And Ben, of course, as you've mentioned there, the West is considering using Russian frozen assets for Ukraine's rebuilding. Now, some say this is against international law. What kind of what's the likeliness of a deal like that going through?
It's not likely at this point. The Belgian government in particular, because most of the money is coming Euroclear in Belgium. And they're afraid that it's never been done before. You can freeze money. Central bank money has been frozen in many different conflicts, such as the Iraq War. But then it technically still remains the property of the Central Bank of Russia in this case. And to actually seize it and use it has never been done before. The Kremlin's calling it theft. And what they'll do is they'll go to court, and the chances of them winning under international law are extremely high because you can't appropriate this money unless you declare war on Russia. In that case, you can take the money. But of course, no one in Europe is prepared to declare war on Russia. So without that declaration, it makes it almost impossible to take this money, which is why von der Leyen has just floated this plan B, because it looks like the effort to seize that money is going to fail.
Yes, and Ben, member states have very differing political climates right now. How realistic is it that EU capitals will agree on this united funding mechanism?
Well, that's almost impossible to get through as well, because it's an EU decision, which of course means that everybody in the EU has to vote to approve it. And Orban in Hungary in particular, but not only Fico in Slovakia, have also said there's no way that we're going to approve using EU taxpayers' money to fund a war in Ukraine, which is not a member of NATO, it's not a member of the EU, basically it's got nothing to do with us. And we need that money to build hospitals, roads, schools, what have you. And so with their veto, getting this approval through is going to be extremely difficult, which again comes back to von der Leyen's plan B, where she's suggesting that individual countries do it on a sovereign basis rather than as an EU thing. And by doing that, then you sidestep the veto issue, because individual governments can make their individual decisions. And that's her plan.
Yes, Ben, Aries, thank you. Do stay with us as we have further updates coming from the Ukraine crisis. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has arrived in Paris to finalise agreements with French President Emmanuel Macron aimed at bolstering Ukraine's air defences. The discussions are focused on the supply of warplanes, missiles and advanced air defence systems to enhance Ukraine's ability to defend against Russia's ongoing invasion. Macron welcomed Zelenskyy at Villa Coublay military airport, where the two leaders signed a letter of intent in front of a Rafale fighter jet. As part of the new agreements, France is expected to provide Ukraine with additional Mirage jets and Aster-30 surface-to-air missiles. Moreover, a strategic aviation deal could include Dassault Rafale jets, significantly strengthening Ukraine's combat aviation fleet. The cooperation comes at a time when Russian attacks, particularly using drones and missiles, have intensified, and Ukraine is seeking long-term military capabilities. Ben joins us once again. Ben, we've just read out what Zelenskyy is expecting from this deal and what is expected. How much of a difference to Ukraine is this going to make?
Well, it all depends on when these armaments arrive. At the moment, at the weekend, Russia launched the most intense drone and missile attack on Kiev of the war, which is saying something. And it rained down hundreds of drones and missiles were hitting particularly energy assets in Kiev and around, and plunged the city into darkness. And so Ukraine needs this help right now. It has insufficient ammo for its air defenses, while it's ramped up drone production, so it's making 4 million drones a year, which is double last year. However, it doesn't have the capabilities to make missiles nor air defense ammunition, and it relies almost entirely on foreign support for that. So it needs a combination of rockets and jet fighters. But jet fighters in particular will take, I don't know, at least a year to arrive, unless they lend them some of the existing ones they have. And the ammo for the air defenses, again, that's largely been America. It's largely been. The trouble with the Patriot missiles is they're so expensive. They're very good at taking out Russia's most sophisticated missiles, but then Russia's sending these waves of up to 400 drones in order to deplete the air defenses ammo, and then sending in the missiles afterwards, and sending these drone attacks, these swarms, every half an hour. So it's become really, really difficult. I mean, Ukraine is right against it now. The airplanes would make a difference because those can go into the sky, and we saw that in the Israel-Iran conflict, where Israel was bombarding, where Iran was bombarding Israel in the summer, and the Israelis had 200 F-16s, and American F-16s were flying alongside with them. And they were very effective at shooting down lots and lots of drones. But they need to come quickly, and I doubt they'll be able to organize them quickly.
Yes, Ben, Aries, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's always an absolute pleasure to get your insight on that ongoing conflict there. Thank you for taking the time. We now move on over to Hungary, and Prime Minister Viktor Orban has said that Hungary will launch a package of tax cuts worth $241.85 million to $272 million for small businesses to be financed with a tax rise on banks next year. Orban has said that the measures would include postponing an excise tax hike on fuel by 6 months at a cost of 20 billion forints, providing tax benefits to energy companies to modernise infrastructure and cutting taxes for small businesses. Okay, now joining us is Dr. Ajay Jua. He's a former Secretary of Commerce and senior economist, and he joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Jua, here on NewsX World. Hungary is cutting taxes for these small businesses while raising taxes on banks to pay for it. From an economic standpoint, is this kind of redistribution a smart policy?
I'm not against it at all. The question is, what is more critical for a particular economy? If Hungary, which is, if you recall the background, it's been a socialist country after the Second World War for a long time, and only now there are some leanings in the present government towards the West, or say towards capitalism, so to say. In these major industries in Hungary were invariably either the capital goods industry or a large number of small industries which are supporting and extending a fair amount of, or creating a fair amount of employment. I think by leaning in favor of the broader base of small and medium industries, the present government is trying to boost up its economy through something which is feasible in the short run and is probably fits into the scheme of things that let's tax the rich, let's tax the big companies. And in this particular case, it doesn't have too many big companies, and it is more of, say, the infrastructure for banking, which it is kind of tapping. So I am not against the idea, as long as the benefits of it would go to a larger number of people and keep the economy, which is otherwise not doing too well. If you would recall, earlier when the president visited the US, President Trump had given a reprieve to it by not continuing with the sanctions on the two large companies of Russia, and said that it can continue to buy its oil from Russia without inviting any kind of reciprocal or penal provisions from the US or other Western countries.
Yes, indeed. Dr. Jua, do stay with us as we have further news from the world of European economics for you to join us on next. Now, during a meeting on November the 17th, China's Vice Premier He Lifeng expressed hope that Germany would leverage its influence within the European Union to improve ties between China and the EU. He welcomed German firms to invest in the Chinese market and believed that trade frictions could be resolved through dialogue and consultation. German Finance Minister Lars Klingbeil, the first representative of Germany's new coalition government to visit China, emphasized the need for fair competition in trade with China. He also highlighted the mutual benefits between China and Germany, with German companies playing a key role in China's growth and modernization. While China's suppliers have become integral to Germany's industrial value chain. Klingbeil's visit comes at a time when Berlin is under pressure to manage its China policy amid a widening trade gap and global supply chain disruptions. Let's have a listen in to the statements made by both the leaders.
世界百年变局正在加速演进，国际形势变乱交织。作为当今世界第2大和第3大经济体， 中德关系的战略性、全局性意义更加凸显。发展健康稳定的中德关系符合两国利益，也符合各方的期待。中方愿意和德方一道，在对话中增进理解互信，在合作中实现互利共赢，通过中德关系的稳定性，为动荡不安的世界注入更多的确定性和正能量。
Dr. Jua joins us once again to discuss this. Thank you very much for joining us, as always. China wants Germany to use its influence inside the EU to repair these China-EU ties, which have been widely under debate over the past few months. How much real leverage does Berlin have over broader EU policy, in particular in regards to trade?
I think that's a very important issue which you raised. Germany's economy is certainly the largest within the EU. But whether on the influence, what kind of an influence it has in Brussels on, they say, the policies, economic and trade policies of EU, it remains a question mark. Reason being, the trade between Germany and China has been invariably pretty significant even in the past. It is now that the EU is being required by, say, President Trump to kind of become a little more a monolithic organization in which Germany is subsumed, and that Germany is under pressure to that extent to be distancing itself from its traditional partner. What has been coming, if you recall, Germany is pretty strong in engineering industries, steel industry, as well as now a fair amount of pharmaceuticals. I would say capital goods plus selected electronics, selected pharmaceuticals, and engineering industries. China, on the other hand, has been able to meet a fair amount of its requirement of consumer goods. The Chinese produce it en masse, as we know, produce it cheaper, and the two-way trade has to that extent been complementary, and that's why China is requesting or suggesting to Germany, to German companies to come and invest in China, because that would kind of integrate them make it more sustainable, rather than letting them wean away again under pressure from someone or the other to get out of an economic relationship or a growing economic relationship between the two countries. So I think the two countries need one another. The Chinese have suggested, are looking for a longer term way out, but whether Germany can get away with the policymakers or the decision makers in the EU remains an issue, and it would probably remain under pressure from its peers in the EU, rather than be able to influence them to move away from the US and kind of expand its business with China. I think Germany may not be able to succeed in that.
Dr. Ajay Jua, thank you very much for joining us. As always, it's a pleasure to get your insight on these issues. Pleasure having you on the show. We now move on, and a British man is convicted for his role in the 2020 Twitter hack that targeted high-profile figures, including former US President Barack Obama, has been ordered to repay £4.1 million, or about $5.4 million in Bitcoin. Prosecutors said Joseph James O'Connor, now 26, pleaded guilty in the United States to charges ranging from computer intrusion to wire fraud and extortion. He was sentenced in 2023 to 5 years in prison. O'Connor was arrested in Spain in 2021 and extradited after the High Court there ruled the US was the best place to prosecute the case. Britain's Crown Prosecution Service has now secured a civil recovery order to seize 42 Bitcoin and other crypto assets tied to the scheme. The scam used hijacked Twitter accounts to solicit digital currency and issue threats against celebrities. The assets will be liquidated by a court-appointed trustee. Now we move on, and South Korea's defense ministry has said that it has proposed talks with North Korea's military to discuss setting a clearer boundary along the military demarcation line between the two Koreas to avoid the risk of potential military clashes. Deputy Minister for National Defense Policy Kim Hong-cheol said that there had been repeated crossings of the demarcation line by North Korean soldiers while installing tactical roads, fences and laying mines. He has also said that the recent incursions came about because of the loss of many MDL markers that were installed under the 1953 Armistice Agreement that brought a halt to the Korean War. Seoul and Pyongyang technically remain at war currently because the conflict ended in an armistice and not a peace treaty. The proposed military talks follow South Korean President Lee Jae-myung's offer of broader discussions with the North without preconditions, a sharp reversal from the hawkish stance taken by his conservative predecessor. Well, that's a wrap on NewsX, the Eurozone. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.